Welcome to today's edition of the IntoTexas AI podcast. It's your look at AI news and trends impacting Texas. I'm your host, Shannon Belew. Let's get started. Tomorrow, the United States will celebrate 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So now feels like the perfect time to talk about a very American kind of freedom, the freedom to build, the freedom to leave a secure job and start something uncertain, the freedom to take what you learn from one role and use it to create something new, the freedom to become an entrepreneur. As a co founder of IntoTexas and a serial entrepreneur, this is a topic very close to my heart. But today, I want to look at another Texas based company that is not only making history of its own in so many different ways, but has also become a launch pad for other startups. Yes, I'm talking about SpaceX. The company's recent IPO dominated headlines with its historic financial milestone that made Elon Musk into the first trillionaire, if only for a moment or two. So while he has recently lost that elite status, the IPO and SpaceX, they're still creating opportunities for lots of people. Long before SpaceX went public, it had already become a training ground for future founders. Former employees had already started companies in space, defense, advanced manufacturing, autonomy, robotics, even transportation, and AI enabled infrastructure. So, as America gets ready to celebrate 250 years of independence, this episode looks at a different kind of independence, the moment when a person takes a risk, makes that leap of faith, and decides to build something of their own. The IPO is historic, but it's not the whole story. There are IPOs that make headlines because of money. And then there are IPOs that tell a bigger story about where an industry is going. And SpaceX public debut is a bit of both. Reuters reported that SpaceX's IPO proceeds rose to $85.7 billion dollars after underwriters exercised their green shoe option. Now, that moved the offering beyond the already record setting $75 billion initial raise. Reuters also reported that the IPO drew more than $250 billion in investor orders and was oversubscribed by roughly three and a half to four times. Now, that tells us a couple of things. First, public market demand for SpaceX was obviously enormous. And second, the IPO is not just a liquidity event for one company, it is a market test for the next wave of frontier technology companies, the kinds of companies building around space and AI and defense and energy infrastructure and advanced manufacturing, that physical AI component. And of course, it sets the tone for what could come for the IPOs of OpenAI and Anthropic, just to name a couple. But for this episode, I think the most interesting question is not just what SpaceX is worth, it's really what does SpaceX help create next? Because the money raised in the IPO is, one form of capital. The other is the people, the engineers, operators, finance leaders, manufacturing experts, policy people, launch teams, Starlink teams, Starship teams, right? All of those employees who now carry both experience and, in many cases, some meaningful paper wealth. Now, that combination can truly be powerful. Experience teaches people what hard problems look like up close. Wealth gives some of them the ability to take more risk. So, together, that can become that startup fuel. Look, this isn't a new playbook. We've certainly seen it in plenty of garage startups of the past that end up becoming mega brands, opening the doors for employees to become founders of their own companies. Think about Google and Microsoft, certainly as perfect examples of this. But maybe this is a new generation of wealth building companies and feels different, in my opinion, because one, I think there's just so much more money being generated and so fast in comparison to some of those older companies, right? And then it's happening again at a much quicker pace and opening the doors for these employees to move to founders at just incredible speed. So it's a really interesting time. So let's look at SpaceX as a founder factory. There's a website that I found that I just thought was fascinating. It's called Alumni Founders. And it's actually been tracking the companies that have been started by former SpaceX employees. It's been doing this for a while. Now, the site is independent and does not seem to be affiliated with SpaceX, but I think it gives us a really interesting view into the size of this alumni ecosystem. The basic rule I think is straightforward. It says to be included, the company says that it needs to have a full time founder. The company should have a full time founder who worked at SpaceX for at least 1 year. That's their criteria. And earlier this year, Forbes reported that SpaceX alumni had founded 141 startups worth approximately $10.6 billion. Now, alumni founders, the website, their current stats now list approximately 150 companies and I think 186 founders. So the tracker, has continued to move. That number is incredible all on its own, but I think it's even more staggering when you consider that much of this happened before SpaceX went public, right? It's before that IPO, which now may really add fuel to the engine, creating even more liquidity and new wealth that turn even more current and former employees both, right, into investors, into entrepreneurs. And it's not just the fact that this entrepreneurial ecosystem is growing. I think it's also intriguing to see what types of companies are being created from those that are coming out of SpaceX. So what SpaceX alumni are already building? Well, let's take a look at a few examples. Take Impulse Space. It was founded by Tom Mueller, one of SpaceX's earliest and most important propulsion leaders. Mueller was a founding member of SpaceX and served as CTO of propulsion. He helped lead the development of propulsion systems for Falcon 1, Falcon 9, and I think Dragon and Falcon Heavy. With Impulse Space, Mueller is now focused on what happens after launch, moving satellites and cargo once they are already in space. Now, SpaceX helped bring down the cost of getting to orbit, whereas Impulse Space is now trying to solve that next bottleneck, mobility within orbit. And I think that's a great example of how SpaceX alumni are not simply trying to just recreate SpaceX, they are building companies around the new problems that SpaceX helped expose. So, another example is Apex, which was founded by Ian Cinnamon and Max Benazzi. Apex is focused on satellite manufacturing, especially satellite bus platforms that can be produced at higher volume for commercial and government customers. In June 2026, Reuters reported that Apex had raised more than $200 million in new funding and more than doubled its valuation to $2.3 billion. Now, that makes Apex one of the more obvious examples of how the SpaceX ecosystem is spreading into the infrastructure around space, not just rockets themselves. Stoke Space is another example. The company is developing a fully and rapidly reusable medium lift launch vehicle called Nova. And in February of this year, Stoke announced that it had extended its Series D financing to $860 million, bringing total capital raised at that time to $1.34 billion. Now, that is serious money going into a company trying to push reusability beyond where the industry is today. Hadrian gives us a slightly different angle. It's not a rocket company, it is an advanced manufacturing company building AI powered factories for aerospace and defense. In July of 2025, so last year, Hadrian announced $260 million in new capital and expansions in California and Arizona, including a larger manufacturing footprint and teams that were focused on shipbuilding and naval defense production specifically. You've also got Varda Space Industries, which stretches the story even further. It's building around microgravity enabled life sciences, essentially using space as a manufacturing environment for materials and pharmaceuticals that may be difficult or impossible to produce the same way on Earth. In 2025, Reuters reported that Varda had raised $187 million to accelerate drug development in space, bringing its total capital to $329 million. Now, that is the kind of company that, really shows how the commercial space economy can evolve. It's not just about going to space, it's about using space. And I think that's a core theme in how we're seeing Musk think about things these days. Similar to his own Terafab factory, it's a multi-billion dollar semiconductor manufacturing project that he announced earlier this year. So, it's not really surprising, I think, to see SpaceX employees or former employees adopt this same mindset as they look to the future and what other companies and products and services could potentially do. So I think it's really fascinating, again, to watch just the types of companies we're seeing coming from employees out of SpaceX. Speaking of which, there are also companies like Turion Space, which is focused on space infrastructure, satellite manufacturing, and orbital intelligence. They announced $75 million plus Series B round funding in April of this year, so just a few months ago. Its first two missions had already delivered more than 40,000 images. Now, however, there are some of the newer examples of startups show that the SpaceX alumni story, again, it's broader than space. In fact, Fast Company recently highlighted Parallel Systems, founded by former SpaceX engineer Matt Soul. The company is developing autonomous battery electric rail vehicles and is trying to replace some short haul trucking with a different model of freight movement. So again, a story that we've covered a good bit in terms of that autonomous vehicle market from a trucking standpoint. This definitely not a rocket company, but you can see the SpaceX influence in what they're trying to do, right? Is taking a physical infrastructure system that has been slow to change, rethinking the engineering model, and really trying to make it more autonomous, right? More electric and therefore more efficient. So, similarly, you've got Reliable Robotics, which is another example founded by Robert Rose, a former SpaceX employee who led software development for Falcon 9. Now, Reliable Robotics is working on autonomous cargo aircraft. And again, Fast Company reported that the company had raised $160 million earlier this year at a valuation of roughly $1 billion. Again, that is not a space company, right, in the most narrow sense, but it is very much a SpaceX alumni type of company. Physical systems, autonomy, safety, regulation, and just a huge existing industry that is difficult to modernize. So, with these examples, I think we do start to see a clearer pattern. SpaceX alumni are not simply leaving to build another SpaceX or more SpaceX. They are taking a way of working and thinking about it differently and bringing that into other markets. So, what SpaceX actually trained people to understand. And I think this is an important part of the equation of what makes these former and existing employees ready to go out and become highly functioning, successful entrepreneurs as they go forward. I think the companies coming out of the SpaceX ecosystem are moving into, launch, satellite manufacturing, in-space mobility, orbital intelligence. Again, we've seen defense production, autonomous rail, and even pharmaceuticals. Now, I think that tells us again something about this environment that they've been working in. It's not just about engineering. It SpaceX, the environment, the company, it trained people to work across complex systems, systems where software, hardware, manufacturing, regulation, government customers, commercial customers, safety, reliability, and even speed, they all collide together, right? It's not a normal startup education. And I think that's why people are starting to compare the SpaceX alumni network to earlier founder ecosystems, like I mentioned before. Another example of that is Fairchild Semiconductor helped seed Silicon Valley through the Fairchildren, which included people who went on to build or shape companies like Intel, AMD, National Semiconductor, PayPal. They produced a famously influential alumni network connected to Tesla, to SpaceX, LinkedIn, YouTube, Yelp, right? Many. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier on, you've got Microsoft and Google, which each produce large alumni networks and founder ecosystems in very different ways. Microsoft's formal alumni organization traces back to 1995, and Google's startup ecosystem includes more than 1,000 Google for Startups alumni companies. Google has also recently been reported to be supporting a new AI incubator aimed at former Google employees. The SpaceX version, it's different because, it's rooted in hard tech. So it's not just about software and that talent that's leading to build more software companies. Again, we see this spread across so many different sectors, right? Aerospace, defense, energy, and of course, AI enabled hardware and infrastructure. Now, I think that the companies that win in this next phase of AI, especially when you think about the physical AI and the companies that are being built around that, it's going to be the ones that understand, how to build complex systems that operate reliably in the real world. And that is where the SpaceX alumni network becomes especially relevant. So, why are investors paying attention? Well, SpaceX has spent more than 2 decades building in one of probably the hardest possible operating environments. Rockets fail in a very public way. Timelines are expensive. Engineering mistakes are very visible. There are regulatory issues, supply chain problems, and even talent density. They all play a role in a company's success, like this type of company, right? And so when people leave that kind of environment, they often carry, I think, a different risk tolerance with them. They have already seen what it looks like to attempt something that maybe most people assume is impossible. And that experience is certainly not a guarantee of success by any means. Not every SpaceX alum who goes off to build a company will do it successfully or create a major company. Not every intense company culture should be romanticized. And not every lesson from SpaceX translates neatly into another industry for successful execution. But I do think there are plenty of reasons that investors are paying attention. A former SpaceX employee doesn't just bring a resume, they often will bring a network, right? A network of people, a team, credibility, technical depth, and really that firsthand understanding of what it takes to build in a high stakes environment. So, those are important factors when investors are looking at not just the concept, but who are the people and that are going to carry that concept forward, and are they really prepared? Do they really understand what it takes to do that? So, this becomes, I think, powerful in a market where, again, investors are looking very seriously at hard tech and especially physical AI companies. I think we're at the very beginning of those. So we're seeing also that renewed interest in space infrastructure, defense technology, advanced manufacturing, robotics, right? Again, it's everything around, how are we taking technology and how are we really making it better connect to our physical world and increasing what can happen with that right mix of things. So it's an exciting time. Now, look, there's still people that are inside SpaceX that are an important part of this overall equation. And, that's just another layer to all of this because The alumni founder network tells us, what's already happened, right? But the recent IPO that happened, it may be an indicator of what's going to happen next. And SpaceX's current leadership team helps explain why the company has become such a powerful training ground for that next environment for founders that are going to be really influential in our world potentially. I think we have to recognize when we talk about SpaceX, we always obviously gravitate toward Elon Musk. But when you study the company, and especially coming out of this successful IPO, Gwen Shotwell really she rises to the top, not just as a leader, but in her influence within the company. And again, this next generation of entrepreneurs that I think is being created. She joined SpaceX in 2002 when the company was still really young. She became president in 2008. And today she is also chief operating officer as well as president. She's widely viewed as the person who keeps the company moving operationally, kind of considered that steady hand, Musk's counterpart and partner in all of this. She works across launches, Starlink, those customer relationships, the government work, and then all that internal execution. Now, her strength is that she helped turn, an impossible, an improbable, seemingly improbable startup into one of the most consequential aerospace companies in the world today. She helped build credibility with customers and win government business. She, really truly supported Musk in helping turn SpaceX from that bold idea and vision that he had into a company that could deliver repeatedly. And that's a different kind of entrepreneurial skill. That kind of leadership is often what future founders are learning from inside a company like SpaceX. Now, you have several other examples across today's leadership team. You've got Brett Johnson, who is the chief financial officer. He brings another piece of the equation. He had a financial leadership experience in the semiconductor industry, including Broadcom and I think Mindspeed Technologies. And at SpaceX, his role has been to help finance an extremely capital intensive business. And so that's a very important skill set. And that type of financial leadership can really make a difference because it's not always easy to scale like you have had in the past with software startups. It's a different model. They need more capital, more long timelines are involved. Investor confidence looks a little bit different. And so that financial discipline, while still taking technical risk, is a unique mix of skill sets, I think. And then you've got leaders like Mark Jankosas, the vice president of vehicle engineering. He's been tied to Starbase operations in South Texas. And, his role is part of a different part of the SpaceX playbook, right? It's the building, testing, iterating, and operating at industrial scale. Then you've got others who, again, have really helped and brought in experience from NASA, served in roles where they've seen a different view from a government side of space flight and what that looks like. You've got Tim Hughes, who is the senior vice president for global business and government affairs. So again, you're bringing in the importance of policy, regulation, international business, and again, those government relationships, which are, if you've not been involved in that before, it's a unique approach to doing business, and it's very different from commercial business. So, having that level of expertise in house, again, as a leadership part of a leadership team, right? It just sets up all of these different attributes, skill sets, the soft and hard that this next generation of entrepreneurs are not just learning, but they're experiencing it firsthand, right? And it's an important mix. So I think what we see is that, SpaceX is producing founders because those employees are exposed to more than simply engineering. They are exposed to operations, finance, again, regulation, government markets, launch logistics, the customer trust relationship building. And again, that high pressure execution, that type of environment, you just don't always get to operate in that and take away the lessons and be able to apply them in other high risk companies and environments, right? So it's really unique. And this kind of exposure can shape people long after they leave. Now, let's talk about IPO wealth as startup fuel, because that's certainly the other part of this that's so critical, right? Yeah, some reports have suggested that thousands of SpaceX employees could see and have seen meaningful paper gains from the IPO. Now, the exact numbers, they're going to vary by employee, tenure, grant size, all of those things. So, we can't overstate it or even fully begin to really understand it and to report on it from that standpoint. But we know that it's there, that it's happening, right? And of course, these employees can't all just sell stock immediately and walk away with the cash. There's obviously some rules and regulations around it. Some analysis of the company's lockup structure suggests that employee share releases will happen most definitely in stages, with certain shares becoming eligible after earnings or performance triggers. And full lockup expiration later in the year. So, I mean, pretty typical if you think in terms of an IPO and what's available. But that also means that this potential wave of startup capital is likely to build gradually. So, not all at once. But even the paper wealth that we're seeing these employees start to experience can change behavior immediately. It can make a future founder more willing to take a risk, right? It can allow that former engineer to become an angel investor, even. It can help someone join an early stage startup without needing that same big company compensation package that's often required in order for them to walk away and do that next endeavor. It can turn operators into, again, backers of this next generation of tech companies. And that's one of the reasons that the recent IPO could end up making just a huge difference for innovation overall. The public offering is not just a financial event for SpaceX. It could become a capital formation event for the broader space, defense, manufacturing, and AI infrastructure economy. And what about for Texas? Well, the state could definitely benefit greatly from all of this, right? Because a lot of this new wealth and operating experience is connected to places where SpaceX has a major footprint. So, Starbase near Brownsville and just the broader Texas technology and infrastructure economy. So we definitely could be recipients of, again, this next generation of entrepreneurial wealth, investors, startups. It's incredible to think about the possibilities. So, what does come next? The next SpaceX inspired company, well, again, it's probably not going to look like SpaceX, nor should it, right? It may build satellite components, again, autonomous transportation, advanced manufacturing systems. I think we'll see a lot continue with defense technology, energy infrastructure. But the founder behind it may have learned the core lesson inside SpaceX, right? Hard things can move faster when the team, capital, mission, and execution model are truly aligned. So, yes, the IPO was historic because of the money, no doubt about that. But the SpaceX ecosystem may be historic because of the multiplier effect. A company can be valuable because of what it sells, but it can also become transformative because of what it teaches. SpaceX is teaching a generation of engineers and operators that impossible timelines are sometimes negotiable, that failure can be part of the process and should be part of the process if the organization actually learns from it. That big missions can attract serious talent, and that the boundary between government, commercial markets, and frontier technology is changing, and the rules are changing. And with that, there's opportunity. Now, again, those lessons are leaving the company and showing up in startup after startup. So perhaps when we look back years from now, the SpaceX IPO may be remembered again as one of the biggest financial events in technology history, but perhaps the more lasting takeaway, SpaceX did not just launch rockets, it launched founders. And those founders may help define the next generation of American technology. So for Texas, this is absolutely a story that's worth continuing to follow. And I'm excited to see where we go next because when the future moves from software into infrastructure, energy, space, advanced manufacturing, well, we know Texas is not standing on the sidelines for any of it. It is already part of the launch pad. That's it for today's episode. As always, thanks for taking time to join us and listen to the IntoTexas AI podcast and participate in the conversation. And again, with the weekend ahead, I hope you have a safe and fun 4th of July celebration. Maybe those fireworks this weekend will spark your next big idea and a bold move as a future entrepreneur. Happy Independence Day. I'll see you next time.